Hi there, I'm your host, Mr. Doyle, and this is a great undertaking. Lint in my mouth. It's turkey time all across the U.S., and you know what that means. It's time for our annual Shawshanksgiving celebration. That's right, folks. Welcome to a very special Shanksgiving episode of the show. I hope you all had a very safe and happy Shanksgiving and are safely enjoying some time with your loved ones this Shanksgiving weekend. I am admittedly way too proud of myself for coming up with the Shanksgiving bit. I couldn't find a way to subtly work it into the episode, so I figured I'd just say it a bunch of times right out of the gate and mention it maybe a few more times throughout the remainder of the video, because I think it's funnier than it probably is. Okay, and now that I've gotten that out of my system, happy Shawshanksgiving, everyone. On this channel, I am relentlessly plowing through the multitude of Stephen King books, movies, short stories, TV shows, musicals, and every other medium in which they have been adapted, interpreted, and bastardized in the order of the original book or story's publication. This is the first video in the Different Seasons series in which, as I assume you have figured out by now, I will be discussing the novella Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption. Different Seasons is comprised of 4 novellas, including... just inhaled something. Different Seasons is comprised of 4 novellas, including Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, Apt Pupil, The Body, and The Breathing Method, and in the coming weeks I'll be taking a closer look at each novella as well as the subsequent films they inspired. I will be referring to the novella that is the focus of today's video, Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, simply as Shawshank from here on out, due to the fact that the title is a mouthful and I have a hard enough time saying words. Additionally, I will be using the story as a jumping off point to discuss some topics that relate to both the United States prison and criminal justice systems, which are of personal interest to me. And also because I am actually a leftist propagandist in disguise whose ultimate plan is to covertly indoctrinate unsuspecting viewers with my radical socialist agenda. I should probably edit that out. History and background. Different Seasons saw publication on August 27th of 1982 and was King's 15th major publication in under a decade. That includes 13 novels, 4 of which were published under the pseudonym Richard Bachman, the Night Shift collection of short stories, and the nonfiction book Dance Macabre. The rate at which King churns out material is unparalleled, honestly. Anyway, the first novella in Different Seasons was Shawshank, and the subject matter, method of storytelling, and genre were all new territory for King. Not everything he had published had been strictly horror up to this point, but the work he was best known for and had built his reputation on was predominantly based in the horror thriller genre. Shawshank is so far removed from his usual brand that if prior to reading Shawshank is so far removed from his usual brand that if prior to reading it you didn't know who wrote it, you'd likely assume it was a different author entirely. While promoting his 2021 novel Later on the BBC news show Hard Talk, King shared this humorous story.
You know, I was in a supermarket down here in Florida, and I came around a corner, and there was a woman coming the other way, and she pointed at me. She said, "I know who you are. You're Stephen King. You write all those horrible things, and that's okay. That's all right. But I like uplifting things, like that movie Shawshank Redemption." And I said, "I wrote that." And she said, "No, you didn't. No, you didn't."
Frankly, it's hard to blame that woman for not believing him. Shawshank was a radical departure and subversion of expectations, but by no means was it an unwelcome one. I wasn't able to find a great deal regarding the inspiration for the story, but according to the Shawshank wiki, the novella's plotline is heavily based on God Sees the Truth But Waits by Russian author Leo Tolstoy. Tolstoy's story is indeed about a man who is wrongly convicted for murder and is essentially a short parable about God's judgment and forgiveness. I couldn't find any quotes from King to support this claim, but after reading the story, it does at least seem plausible that King drew inspiration from the story. However, I wouldn't go so far as to say that Shawshank is heavily based on the Tolstoy story. I have provided links to both text and audio versions of God Sees the Truth But Waits in the description below for anyone interested. The Shawshank wiki also stated, quote, King states that the story was inspired by various prison films he watched growing up, unquote, and I wasn't able to find any direct quotes or other sources from King to back up this statement either. Wrongful imprisonment. Andy Dufresne is convicted for the double murder of his wife and her secret lover. However, we are told through the narrator Red that Dufresne claims he is innocent. We are provided a recounting of the trial and timeline of events, but like Red, the reader is not immediately convinced of Dufresne's innocence. There is an undeniably strong case against him. It's not until later in the story that proof of his innocence comes to light, and we finally learn that Dufresne is in fact innocent and that the justice system has failed him, which is totally not something that could ever happen in real life. Nope. The United States criminal justice system is infallible, incorruptible, foolproof, bulletproof, waterproof. Except for when it isn't, which is way more often than one might suspect. In fact, between 2% and 10% of convicted individuals in the United States prisons are innocent. Were you to apply this statistic to the era in which the story of Shawshank begins, the late 1940s and early 50s, Andy Dufresne would be one of anywhere from 5,000 to 25,000 incarcerated inmates who were potentially innocent. Apply that same stat to today's incarcerated population, and that number jumps to between 50,000 and a staggering 250,000 innocent individuals behind bars, a disproportionate amount of which are persons of color. F***ing shocker, I know. And I kid you not, as I was writing this script, I got a news notification with a headline that read, quote, Kevin Strickland freed from prison after longest Missouri wrongful conviction. Look at the date on this freaking article. This is from yesterday, the day before I recorded this video. Dude was in jail for over 40 years for a triple murder that he didn't commit. And guess what? Are you ready to be really surprised, shocked, and astounded? Kevin Strickland is black. Surprise! And as if that last example wasn't incredibly timed and insanely relevant enough, earlier today, I was waiting for my car to repair it in the lobby of the shop and decided to parse over the day's issue of the local paper. And on the very front page was this article entitled, Upstate Man Exonerated of Author's in 1981. This man, Anthony Broadwater, was imprisoned for 16 years after he was falsely identified as the perpetrator and upon release had to register as a sex offender, which caused him to be ostracized from his community and made it hard for him to find employment. In all seriousness, this man's sentence went on well beyond the 16 years he spent imprisoned. This story is incredibly infuriating in that Anthony Broadwater, now 61 years old, was not successfully identified in a lineup by his accuser, and it was a now widely discredited method of microscopic hair analysis that was used to further falsely incriminate him. Also, it was author Alice Sebold who wrote the very successful novel The Lovely Bones that claimed to be Broadwater's victim, and it was her identifying him in court that sealed his unfortunate fate. I have no doubt that someone did in fact do to Siebold what she claims happened, and that is terrible. But she destroyed this innocent man's life while she wrote about and essentially monetized her trauma and led a successful, fulfilling life, something she stole from Broadwater. Read the article in the description. It's wild, and yes, Anthony Broadwater is also black, because of course he is. Come the f*** on. Turns out that innocent black people are approximately 7 times more likely to be convicted of murder than innocent white people, and black people who are convicted of murder are about 50% more likely to be innocent than non-black people convicted of murder. So that is unfortunately not surprising. Oh, and people with mental disabilities are also disproportionately vulnerable to being wrongfully convicted. It's super f***ing cool. Here are some additional quick stats that will most certainly help to solidify your faith in the U.S. justice system. Proven innocent people have collectively served more than 23,950 years in prison so far. 69% nice of all wrongful conviction cases happen due to eyewitness misidentification. False accusations are present in 70% of all wrongful convictions. That all sounds vaguely f***ing familiar. At the time of writing, the United States is home to 2.5 million incarcerated individuals. That's nearly equivalent to the entire population of Chicago, the 3rd most populated city in the country. 450,000 of which are nonviolent drug offenders who are, you guessed it, disproportionately people of color. It's the land of the free, baby! Woo! Sources for all of these statistics and additional information are available in the description below for anyone interested. Prison labor. During their stay in Shawshank, Red and Andy, along with a number of their fellow inmates, are tasked with tarring the roof of the prison. Their payment for their labor? Getting to spend time outside, and thanks to some negotiating on Andy's part, a few warm beers apiece. And it's not at all uncommon. It's standard operating procedure, in fact, for prisons to put their wards to work both inside and outside the premises. Over the years, the courts have upheld that inmates may be forced to work and are not protected by the Constitution against involuntary servitude. Many would argue that this practice is equivalent to modern-day slavery, and the parallels are hard to ignore. Held in captivity, forced to labor, often in unsafe conditions, no constitutional right to compensation or protections. Sure sounds like the same thing, but not only do slavery and forced labor sound like the same thing, prison labor was in fact an explicit result of the abolition of slavery in the 1860s. The economy of the southern United States had become so dependent on slave labor that following the ratification of the 13th Amendment, lawmakers basically made it illegal to be black and unemployed or homeless. Are you a recently freed slave with no job or property? Well, turns out those are both now crimes, punishable by imprisonment and subsequently slave labor. These loopholes became known as black codes and went well beyond making joblessness and homelessness the only crimes punishable by imprisonment and prison labor. Other crimes punishable by imprisonment as per black codes included unlawful assembly, interracial relationships, violation of slave-like labor contracts, possession of firearms, making or selling liquor, selling agricultural produce without written permission from an employer, and practicing any occupation other than servant or farmer without holding a judge-ordered license. So instead of buying people and forcing them to labor for free, they just created explicitly racist laws, locked people up for breaking those explicitly racist laws, and forced them to labor for free. They're prisoners, you see, not slaves. This is not at all the same thing. This is distinctly different. They're criminals now, we decided. Isn't history fun, you guys? Now, it is important to note that prison labor would not remain an institution that was strictly thrust upon former slaves and persons of color. This new and improved system of labor exploitation would become all-inclusive, an equal opportunity program for folks of all races, classes, and backgrounds. You see, folks, equality and fairness in the United States justice system. We f***ing did it. There is a great deal more discussion that could be had in regards to this topic, but suffice it to say that in regards to the economic impacts, moral implications, and overall constitutionality of prison labor, well, the jury is still out on all of that. Grain and drain. As a means of punishment, prisoners at Shawshank Prison are deprived of nutritional meals and are placed on what inmates refer to as the Sam Norton Grain and Drain train, which means they are given only bread and water as sustenance for an extended period of time. I was curious what a diet like this would actually do to the human body and what the long-term effects would be. Unsurprisingly, the old proverb, "Man shall not live on bread alone," is more than just a clever Bible quote. A few consequences of the grain and drain diet would include weakened bones, as bread does not contain vitamin D and minimal amounts of calcium. Low levels of these vitamins may lead to osteoporosis, which is a bone disease that increases your risk of fractures. In addition to skeletal consequences, if your diet consisted solely of bread and water, you'd likely end up with scurvy. Yar, scurvy, a sailor's ailment and a relic of the 18th century. Scurvy is caused by a lack of fruits and vegetables or just not enough vitamin C. Symptoms of scurvy include swollen, bleeding gums, anemia, poor wound healing, and the opening of previously healed wounds. Fortunately, this only happened in the fictional story of Shawshank. This isn't a real concern in United States prisons. This is a made-up thing that Stephen King wrote in a story with no real-life precedent or parallels. Pause for dramatic effect. Here are just a few headlines from some articles that popped up when I Googled poor nutrition in prisons. Food for thought. Prison food is a public health problem. Research confirms that prison food is not just gross, it is often nutritionally inadequate. Ending the hidden punishment of food in prisons. Prison food, a hidden public health crisis. On the menu at American prisons. Rotten food, inadequate diet. And it goes on and on. Some would argue that, hey, you broke the law, and now as a consequence, you don't get to eat healthy food, and that's what you get for being a criminal. Eat garbage, scoundrel. Sucks to be you. But I would argue that people who say things like that are monsters. And also, you'd be arguing it is justified to deprive all inmates of nutritional foods. But we've already discussed in this video that so many innocent people are incarcerated. So you'd be advocating depriving innocent people of nutritional food. Why are you like this? Who hurt you? Not everyone in prison is a murderous sexual deviant deserving of lifelong suffering, you maniacal clown person. Besides, if you really wanted prisoners to suffer, wouldn't you just want them to eat nothing but raw fruits and vegetables all day, every day? What's your favorite food? Your go-to snack? Meal of choice at your favorite restaurant? Is it an apple? Do you really look forward to chowing down on some uncooked celery after a hard day's work? Do you have a craving for a nice hot, steaming helping of parsnips? Hell no! You want some fried chicken, mac and motherfucking cheese, hamburgers and steaks and pizza and wings. You should consider bad-for-you trash food with no nutritional value to be a luxury. I would argue that if you're of a mind that inmates don't deserve yummy, delicious food, and you really want to stick it to those hardened criminal scourges on society, you should be in favor of feeding them nothing but the best, most nutritious foods, because they're the most boring, unexciting, least fun foods in the world. Yeah, that's right. You eat those raw carrots, which are known to lower your risk of diabetes, improve cholesterol levels, and are important for bone health. That'll teach you not to possess a nominal amount of marijuana, you non-violent drug offender scum. Oh boy, wouldn't you know, I'm back on my make everything political shit again. I can't help myself. Every chance I get, I'm just injecting my political propaganda into the conversation. Honestly, I got so fucking upset while researching this, and those 2 articles just slapped me right in the face, one right after another. It was especially infuriating. This was supposed to be about the Shawshank novella, but instead I'm here rambling on and on about how maybe institutional slavery is bad, or how perhaps we shouldn't starve the incarcerated of the vital nutrients they need to survive. Well, in the spirit of Shanksgiving, it only makes sense for me to discuss all of the vast injustices that have affected entire demographics and cultures of people, and go on an obnoxiously long rant about the atrocities committed by the colonizers, not only throughout history, but currently taking place in the United States. That's right, we're talking about Native American genocide now. Buckle the up, because I'm only getting started. Be sure to click like and subscribe to the channel for my continued analysis of all things Stephen King, pretty pleased with blood and guts on top. My name is Mr. Doyle, and this has been a great undertaking.